So we look at the next lesson, lesson 4, and creating a simple API and being able to test it using our front-end client. So we are going to use either the browser or the Postman tool and test the API that we have just created. So the API is application programming interface, and what it is basically is that it is the way the backend is able to listen for requests from the client, and then it is going to take that request, process the request, and then it is going to send back the response to the client. All right. So maybe the client wants to create an account, so the client is going to enter some details, submit to the backend, and when it is sending the backend, it is going to call the backend by using an API. So on the backend, we have an API which is responsible for creating an account. We have an API for login. We have an API for maybe uh, checking your account balance. We have an API for sending or transfer of money. So for an API basically is the way your backend logic should be. All right. So we wrap that logic within the API, and then we expose the API and tell the client, in case you want to perform this function, then reach out on this API. In case you want to do this, then reach out on this particular API. All right. So since we are just starting, we are going to create a simple API which does what? The API simply returns a simple greeting message saying, hello, welcome to this, or hello, how are you? All right. So that should be the task of the API. So anytime I tell you create an API, then the question should be, I'm going to create an API to do what? So an API is basically a task on the back end. So the API is going to we are going to create is a simple API to return a simple greeting message. All right. So to do that, I have placed this code snippet in the next slide here, so that you can be able to refer to it in case you may have any question or in case of any reference. So let me get this code snipped, and we get back to our project, and I'm going back to my index.js, and I'm gonna replace it with this one. So let's look at this code line by line so that we can understand what it is. So I'm going to remove the Mongoose library for now, because we are not connecting to any database for now. And then, so the same thing in line 1 and line 2, what I'm doing, I'm importing the Express, and this Express library is important to help us to create a simple Express app. Without it, then you cannot even create a backend app. Line 2, we are also importing the env file. See this one, this particular line is the same as writing it in the form of saying import env.env from .env. All right. So this line 3 and line 2 is the same thing. What is you doing is just is importing. So it is just a two-way of writing this import statement. You can either use this format or you can use this format. So I decided to use that particular format. Then in line 4, we are now using this express that we have imported to create or to initialize an app. Then in line 6, we are now loading the env file, and this env file is this one. It has only one variable for now, the port number. Then in line 7, we are now creating a variable port, and we are accessing the port number which is inside the env file. Okay. Then line 8 is just a simple comment telling you what the next code of line does. So here we are creating a simple API with a greeting message. So now on line 8, we are now using the app, and then we use the function called get. Remember, when we were looking at the introduction to internet and the fundamentals of internet, we had introduced 4 HTTP methods: get, post, delete, and put. So the get is the method we use when we want to get some data from the server. So we are on the server, we are declaring an API with a get method. Then we are saying that this API should be slash, let me add a slash hello, slash greeting. Me even say slash API slash version 1 slash greeting. So this is the API path. Then we are using asynchronous, and we say request response. So this is the request coming from the client, and this is the response that the server will return to the client. So here we are saying that when the request comes from the client, return return this response dot status. So this response should have a status of 400. This is the status code. You remember we did the status code, and we said that there are so many types of status codes: 401, 200, 500, 403, 404, and all those status codes. You can find them in your notes here. When I go back to fundamentals of internet, should be able to see the status codes and their meanings. So here we are saying that this response should go with the status code 400. Then it should have a JSON format, because we said the way the client and the server communicate is by using a format called JSON. So when the client is sending any data to the server, it should send that data in the form of JSON. And even when the server is responding to the client, the server should respond by sending the data in the form of JSON. And so our response should be in the form of JSON. Or even let me write it in full to avoid confusion. I put request, and here I put response. So if it is request response, here it should also be response dot status 400 dot JSON. And in this JSON, let us add our own status called 0, make it 01. Then the message should be the greeting message, maybe hello world from Express, welcome, maybe welcome to coding with code archive. So this is the message we want to return. Welcome to coding with code archive. And then let me remove this data field. We don't want this for now. Even me remove this. All right. Then the next line 13, we are now making our app to listen. So always our application must be listening on the port number. So the port number is the one that we have defined in the env file, which is 880. Then this is just a simple log statement, which is saying server running on port 880, or server is running on port whatever. Or you can put any log statement you want to see, so that when this statement is printed out, then you can now be able to ascertain and be sure that your application has started successfully and it is now running successfully. This is a way of debugging. Then now we just polish this, and now let us save And so when it saves, nodemon does its work, and it restarts the application, and now our application is running on port 80 81, I mean 8080. Now when we go back to our the browser, when we access it on 8080, it still gives us this error because we have not specified the path, the API path. Mark this one, API path. So this is just the local host, and then we have specified the port number. So for us to be able to see the result of a particular API, we should provide this path /API/v1/greetings. So when we put this path in our browser, then the browser is going to send a request to this server, and this method, this code below here, will now be executed. And when this code is executed, we are able to get this this response in our browser. So we need to copy this path the way it is, or if you can type it, but make sure that you don't mess up with the spelling anywhere. So now we go back to our browser. It should be now localhost colon 8080, then slash API/v1/greeting. So when you press that, you should be able to see this response coming back in the browser saying status 001 message, welcome to coding with Code Archive. And you can see this response is in the form of JSON. What's a JSON? A JSON is a data that is wrapped within the curly braces. Can you see these curly braces? There is one at the beginning, then at the end. Within the curly braces, it is in form of an object, in short. Okay, so a JSON in full is JavaScript object notation. So you can see this is an object, and in particular it's a JavaScript object. So an object, we said earlier when we were looking at JavaScript, an object is written in the form of curly braces, and it has the property and then the value. So the property is the status, the value 01, property message, value, welcome to Code Archive. So this format is what we are calling the JSON. So once a client is sending a request to the server, it must make sure that the data it is sending is in form of JSON. The same way, when the server is responding back, it should respond back with this JSON. So now when the client gets this data, the client can now access it by displaying on the UI, the user interface. Of course, now when we use our React app, we should be able to display this message in a very good UI or user interface, which the user can now be able to understand and relate with. Okay, so that's all about creating an API. So we have created one simple API. We can add another API. Let's add another API that will say will give us a different message. So we can still copy this, or you can type another one if you want to type or go the long way. So let me say app.get, then in the bracket we specify the API path slash, let's call the API slash v1 slash courses, right? So when we call this API, it should list for us all the courses that is offered by Code Archive. So we call it slash courses. Then now the next thing, we now define the logic for that API. So we use a synchronous way of programming. Then in bracket request, it's using Express request, so we just use request here, comma, response, then arrow function. Okay, then now we define the logic. So when this API is called, simply return response dot status status code 200 dot json data json format, and in this json format return um, courses object, and this course object should be a list of courses. Okay, so we have full stack, React, JavaScript, alright. So let's say for now there are three courses. Then of course our lines should end with semicolon, and let's save that. So now let's call this API. So how do we call it? We go to our front-end client and make sure we now change this, should now be API slash v1 slash courses, and make sure you should not have typing errors here. And so when type courses, now it gives you a list of courses the way you have typed it, full stack, React.js, JavaScript. So you could have many APIs to perform different tasks depending on your requirements of your application. Alright, so that's how we create a simple API. But you see, if you are working with a real project, you're going to have hundreds of APIs. Let's say you are working with a real client project. A client approaches you and tells you, I want you to develop for me a full learning management system for my school, or health management system for my hospital. How are you going to approach this? You see, this is a very complex project. It is going to have so many APIs. For example, you want to create an API to allow users to create an account. The admins should be able to log in. The doctor should be able to schedule appointments. The doctor should be able to view all the patients. The doctor should be able to diagnose a patient, or maybe discharge a patient from the hospital. So all these are logic, all these are functionalities that your application should perform. Each one of those functionalities must have a corresponding API to be able to handle that. So in that real world application, you're going to have so many APIs, and you cannot put all that APIs in one file like this, like in one index file like this. So what you will need to do in real world is that you will need to separate, you need to create a different file to write the code or the logic for API, and that file we are going to put it in this folder called router. You remember the folder we created initially, the router folder. So within this folder, we should create another file, call it API routes, and then we put all the code logic for the API in that router folder. So guys, this is what we will be looking next tomorrow. After this, I want us to pause this class today at this point, so that now you can even have time to practice and even create your own API so far up to here. Then tomorrow, now when we meet, we now look at how we can now remove this code for API from here and put it in a different file within the router folder. Then now we can import it here in the index.js. Is that okay? So that's what we will look next tomorrow. Let me know if anyone has a question to ask before we can close our today's class. Any query, any question, clarification?